today. Chair Groves, as well as Commissioner Heather Buck, Board Member Caitlin Vargas, Coburg City Administrator Ann Heap, Eugene Mayor Lucy Venice, Board Member Jim Gamble, Councilor Steve Moe, Board Member Don Norton, Staff Member Neil Moyer, Staff Member Ellen Courier, Rob Innerfeld, Sid Schoaf, Sasha Vartanian, Michael Wisp, Dan Collister, ODOT Staff Member Bill Johnston, Staff Member Kelly Clark, oh, it just moved, Emma Newman, Megan Winter, and Tom Schwetz. Attending from the public are 2 members from BEST, Cassidy Mills and Lynn Taylor, the minutes recorder. If I did not call your name, please let me know. I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Brenda. So as chair, I'm calling this meeting to order. And just before we get started, I just want to comment that we have a very full agenda today, and I'm going to try and keep the meeting moving. I certainly do not want to cut anybody off or cut anyone short, but if you could help me being as succinct as possible, we will work our way through the agenda. So with that, we're moving on to item 3, approve the March 3rd, 2022 MPC meeting minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand. So with that, is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes.
Motion made by Mayor Venice. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Heather Buck. I'm sorry, what's that? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor, raise your virtual hand, please. Okay, it's looks like it's unanimous. The motion passes. And so we'll move on then to item 4, adjustments to the agenda or announcements from MPC members. Are there any adjustments to the agenda first?
Staff has none.
Okay, Councilor Moe has his hand raised. Is that for the vote? Okay. So we'll move to if any members of the MPC have announcements for the committee. I'm not seeing any. Okay, we're doing really well so far. So we'll move on to item 5, comments from the audience. Do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
Yes, we do. Councilor, at the moment we have one of the best members who wishes to be speaking, so I have promoted that person to a panelist, and I'm going to just take a wild guess that it's Rob Zako.
Okay, Paul, thank you. Before we start that, let me quickly go over the instructions here, just so we're all on the same page. We're allowing access via Zoom, of course. Anyone wishing to comment in general or during public hearing will be asked to raise their virtual hand. And when prompted by the chair at the beginning of each public comment opportunity, speakers will be moved to panelist status and asked to speak on a first-come basis. There is a limit of 3 minutes per person. Thank you.
Councilor, actually first up from the public to speak is Claire Roth. Claire, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Claire Roth. I'm the Safe Streets Coordinator with Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, also known as BEST. 10 years ago, BEST formed to support the West Eugene MX. At the time, the issue on the forefront of our minds was better transit. Fast forward to now, we as a community are continuing to evolve and learn about the breadth and depth of the issues we face in transportation. We have learned the value of a complete street, or a street that is designed and operated to enable safe use and support mobility for all users. BEST is pleased to see that moving ahead, an integral part of the complete street vision that will move our community safely and comfortably, is moving ahead. We support MPC's approval of moving ahead today. Doing so will make us eligible to receive federal funding to invest in our community and generations to come. Moving ahead isn't just about today and keeping our streets at the status quo. It's about creating the complete streets that our children and generations to come deserve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. Paul, is there anyone else?
Counselor, I'm now adding the second member of BEST, I believe Rob Zako, to the panel so he can speak. And Rob, when you're ready, please do.
Oh, I have video and audio. Good morning. My staffer, Claire Roth, is a hard act to follow. I'm not as articulate as she is. And right now I'm actually pretending to be our third staff person, Colin Hill, who's a policy analyst intern with the University of Oregon. And he was going to make comments today, but he has a job interview. And so I'm trying to fill in for him. I want to comment on agenda item 6B, which has to do with the regional primary funding considerations. You'll be discussing this shortly, and staff is putting forward for you a tool to link goals or in particular objectives in the RTP with particular funding for projects through applications. In general, BEST is pleased with this direction, and we support what staff is doing. That said, this is at a fairly high level, and the objectives are fairly broad and vague, and we're wanting to see how this is applied in practice, how you actually interpret whether an objective is being advanced by a project or not. So we support the direction this is going, and we look forward to seeing more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Paul, anyone else?
Counselor, at this time, nobody else on the attendee list has raised their virtual hand. However, one last call if anybody else wishes to speak. And I'm seeing no one.
Okay, are there any responses or questions from MPC members regarding the public comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Move on to item 6, Metropolitan Planning Organization MPO issues, and we'll start with 6A, addendum to the MPO Unified Planning Work Program. Let's see, Ellen, I believe you're the staff person. Do you want to take it away from here?
Hi, sorry, I don't have a functioning camera today, so otherwise I would turn it on. So every year we adopt either a UPWP, which is our Unified Planning Work Program, or an addendum. This year we're adopting an addendum, and it covers the changes that we anticipate to our work program for the next year, which is attached in the packet. We meet with our federal and state partners. We've met with them in February to discuss any of their changes, and that is documented in this addendum. We also update our funding as part of this process, and that is what we are adopting today. We would like to hold a public hearing before adoption, and happy to answer any questions if folks have questions about that.
I have a process question. Do we hold a public hearing for each of the subsets, or do we do one for all of item 6? I'm seeing on the agenda there's a public hearing after each one.
We do need to have a separate public hearing for each item.
I just wanted to confirm. So I guess we're ready to open the public hearing for 6A.
Counselor, at this time, I see again Rob Zako raising his hand, so let me once again return him to the panel. And Rob, when you're ready, please speak to this public hearing.
Good morning again. This is Rob Zako, Executive Director of BEST, playing myself this time with comments I intended to give, testifying on item 6B, the Unified Planning Work Program. But I first want to say, we of course live in a representative democracy. You members of MPC represent the public and are deciders. But for you to represent the public, you need to have opportunities to hear from the public. Not necessarily do everything we say, but learn what we're thinking and have that inform your views. We'll just note that you're making decisions this morning in 4 areas. Moving ahead comes on later. MTIP administrative amendments, coronavirus funding, and the UPWP. But it's the UPWP, which is perhaps the smallest and least important of those 4, which is the only one that has a public hearing. We're frankly confused when you have a public hearing and when you don't, or when you should. I'll take this opportunity to say, again, we support moving ahead, but we don't believe that MPC has ever had a public hearing on that. It's a really big deal of hundreds of millions of dollars. It probably won't change the outcome, but probably you should allow the public to have a say on that before you decide. Moving to the MTIP administrative amendments, there's a $30+ million Franklin Boulevard project. It's a new project. The notes say that the public review of that April 5th, just a month ago. We must have missed that because we don't recall an opportunity to do that. It's a new project. It's a good project. We support it. But again, we don't know when the public had a chance to weigh in on that and when a decision was made to move forward. There are other good projects and safety projects. We see safety work at 54th and Main in Springfield in particular, and the MTIP amendments. We're not questioning that you approve those or that staff has already done so. We just think there needs to be a public process. Turning to the UPWP, a lot of this is just routine planning, which needs to be done or is required to be done. We don't have any issues with that. There are in the addendum, though, some special projects. We're not going to highlight any of those because you'll be approving those in a few minutes. But we will say that some of these are discretionary, and we're seeing some agencies doing a lot of planning all at the same time, and it's not clear to us what some of these planning projects are actually buying. And we're wondering whether just because federal funding is available, whether the planning should be done or there should be more deliberation about how much you as policymakers and the public can absorb at one time. We support approval of the UPWP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Anyone else, Paul?
Counselor, at this time, no one else has raised their hand to speak during the hearing.
Okay, are there questions or comments, discussion by MPC members? Mayor Venice.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Rob's testimony, and I just wondered if we could, if staff now or at another time could give us a sort of a clear explanation about when a public hearing is called for and when it's not called for, what the requirements are, the expectations are, and I just think it would be helpful for us to know what the rules are, because they're not clear to me either, and I'm assuming clearly not clear to the public.
Counselor, may I respond?
Yes, please, Paul.
Mayor and others, when we put items on the MPC agenda and they are items that are asking for action, we refer to your public participation plan. The MPO's public participation plan is published on the MPO website, and it contains a table that specifically indicates what type of involvement is needed for what type of action. The UPWP that we're considering now requires a public hearing. Something like the RTP adoption that you did several months ago requires a public hearing. Most of the other items only require a public notice and an opportunity for comment, but do not call for a public hearing. And again, this is the public participation plan that you adopted several years ago. I'm happy to send that table out after this meeting, but that does specify what type of involvement for what type of action.
Thank you, Paul. I think I'll jump in the queue here. I'm not seeing anyone else with their hand raised. I too have some concerns about this. I agree with what Mayor Venice said, and I appreciate Rob Zako raising this issue. I believe strongly in the public process. We are representatives. He is correct. But, you know, hearing from the public on these large dollar items, I think is important. And then I've got another layer of confusion. I'm still trying to figure out where the line is in the fact that the MPC is technically not the MPO. That's the LCOG by the board of directors. And so as far as a hearing on this, has that been fully delegated to MPC to hear, or does the MPO, which is the LCOG board, still have a role in this?
Councilor, this action, similar to the RTP that we discussed earlier, is fully delegated to MPC. MPC is the final decision-making body for the adoption of the UPWP.
Okay, great. Thank you. That helps clarify that piece. So are there any other comments from the MPC? And, oh, Paul, you have something else?
I was just going to add one more comment if I could, because there was attention called to some of the special projects in the UPWP. I want to clarify that the Unified Planning Work Program serves two purposes. The first is to establish the MPO's work program and its funding for the fiscal year. And the second is to serve as a public information document that shows the public and you all of the transportation planning activities, including those outside of the MPO, that will be conducted during that fiscal year. So the special projects section is not strictly something that you're approving. It is more the information piece. And there is no action that you're taking today that affects those special projects or their funding.
Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, well, if there's not any more comments, we'll move on to agenda item 6B, regional primary funding considerations. Dan Callister is the LCOG staff person that's listed as presenting this item.
Council. I'm sorry to interrupt again, but we need to close the public hearing and then we'd ask for approval of the resolution to adopt the UPWP.
Excuse me. Thank you for correcting me there. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve resolution 2022-05 adopting UPWP addendum and programming funding?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Buck.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mayor Venice. I think I'm going to go to Commissioner Buck's way of doing the vote. Are there any in dissent on this issue? Okay, I'm seeing none, so I'm going to say that's a unanimous approval. Okay, Paul, are we ready to move on at this point?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for correcting me on that. Now we'll move on to item 6B, regional primary funding considerations. And Dan, if you're ready to present on this, take it away.
Thank you. So this item is asking for approval of the recommended regional primary funding considerations to direct Central Lane MPO's project selection process. So over the next couple of months, the MPO will be going through our next project solicitation process, where we'll be selecting projects to use the discretionary federal funding that the MPO will be receiving through 2027. And prior to this process, we typically come to MPC to establish what are the funding priorities that will help direct that selection process. We presented a couple months ago, you may remember, MPC discussed placing emphasis on funding projects that support the updated goals of the recently adopted long-range plan, the RTP, adopted in January. So the original draft proposal was just those 7 goals from the RTP. And in discussing at MPC, first of all, that was a good way to draw a clear link between the RTP and the funding of projects, which really the TIP, the programming document, is the implementation arm of the RTP, and drawing that clear link is a good thing to be very transparent with, and our federal partners have been helping, giving us some guidance on maybe being more transparent in that regard. Not that we haven't been, but our processes maybe aren't as clear about how we've been transparent. So with the discussion at MPC, the thought was those goals are very general, they're general on purpose, but maybe they're too general to be really helpful for the purpose of winnowing projects down. So MPC tasked staff to go back to the drawing board and maybe find some recommendations that could still support the RTP, but would be more helpful for the project selection process. So over the last couple of months, the Technical Advisory Subcommittee task has been reviewing instead the 28 objectives from the RTP. The objectives are more specific than the goals. They're clear and would provide maybe a better tool for project selection and prioritization. In attachment 2, I've listed all 28 of the goals from the RTP, as well as, objectives, the 28 objectives from the RTP, as well as the goals that they support. Many of those objectives support multiple goals, some of them just one. Task over the last couple of months have been reviewing those lists of objectives and creating a subset that they would recommend as the regional primary funding consideration. So attachment 1 calls out the 8 objectives from the 28 that is recommended as the subset of objectives that would serve as the regional primary funding considerations. They're also on attachment 2 that includes all 28. They're the ones that are highlighted, so you can see which ones are included in that list. So that subset of RTP objectives are what the local agency staff committee thinks best achieve what MPC wants and support the priorities of the local agencies. So what we're coming to MPC today is hopefully to discuss this, get some confirmation, maybe finalize this list, tweaking it if needed, and ultimately having a final approved list of primary funding considerations to direct our process moving forward, which, as I said, will be over the next couple of months, starting very soon, starting only in a couple of months, a couple of weeks. I'm happy to answer any questions or direct any discussion that's necessary, but there is that list.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any questions or comments from the MPC on this issue? Mayor Venice.
Thank you. I really like this matrix a lot. And so I really want to appreciate your effort to put it together. And I will confess that on my first reading, I didn't quite capture all of it. And then when I looked at it again, I liked it even better. And I think that my issue the first time looking at it is I was a little worried that we hadn't called out climate change and greenhouse gas emissions enough. But actually, as I look at it, I realize you actually call it out in a couple of places. So I think that's for me, was sort of the trigger that I think we're trying to look at is how much are we aligning this with greenhouse gas emissions goals. And I think this is very helpful, and I have no concerns about the highlighted ones that you've seen as sort of the key goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Other comments or questions? I am not seeing any. So we're supposed to provide direction to staff. I'm not hearing anything members are wanting to change. Commissioner Buck.
Provide a motion if you feel you're ready.
I just wanted to make sure I was not missing anybody, and that, yes, if you would care to make a motion, that would be excellent.
Right. I'll move approval of the regional primary funding considerations to direct the Central Lane MPO's project selection process.
Okay, a motion made by Commissioner Buck. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mayor Venice. Anyone opposed, please raise your hand or virtual hand. I'm not seeing any. That passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to item 6C, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act, and this is the CRRSAA funding. Brenda and Paul, do you want to take this away?
Yes, please. I think I'm going to lead off. And so let me just give a brief introduction, and then Brenda wants to speak to a few specifics. If you recall, 2 months ago, we brought to you a request to receive the CRRSAA, or what we call CRRSA funds, in the form of relief funding, and you approved that action. Since that time, we have actually received the funding from FHWA through ODOT and are now able to distribute the CRRSA funds. What this agenda item does is recommend a distribution of those to really two main purposes. One is to regional broadband planning and development of a strategic plan, as well as furthering implementation through applying for grants and the like. Brenda will speak to that in a minute. And the second part is to distribute the balance of the funds to the four general purpose governments, Coburg, Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County. Transportation Planning Committee, your staff advisory committee, looked at this. First of all, they unanimously recommended approval of this recommended distribution of the total funds. And second of all, in distributing the balance of the funds to the four local jurisdictions, they looked at a number of factors such as lane miles, population, and other considerations, and recommend the distribution of the funds, as you see on page 3, to the four general purpose jurisdictions. They did not want, frankly, given Coburg's size, they did not want Coburg to receive such a small amount that it was not of any use. So they set a minimum threshold for Coburg. So that's why you see that at the 5% level. That's the general outline of this agenda item and how we arrived at the distribution of the four governments, but Brenda will speak more to the broadband funding.
Thank you, Paul. I don't need to go into the details. You have that in that memo before you, but something that we've been discussing, especially with the release of additional federal funding that will go to states for the strategic building out of broadband in all regions and states. We need to be ready to apply for and implement that funding in our region. And quite frankly, we are not. And one of the issues that we've had is we know what we need, sort of, but we also know that we didn't have any funding in order to move a strategic plan forward. And so what this proposal does for the use of these funds is it allows us to hire a consultant to assist our region. And when I talk about the region, I talk primarily about Lane County, but also Lincoln, Lynn, and Benton County as well, as we are part of a 4-county economic development district. And the importance of that is it allows us to leverage additional federal funding that will be available for broadband deployment. In hiring a consultant, that consultant will help us develop a strategy and help set our region up to be eligible to apply for federal funding, which we expect to be released over the next 2 quarters through the federal government. We have never done this before, so we estimated what we believed it would cost, as well as setting aside or reserving part of the funding for federal match, because we know that will also be necessary. And why go through the exercise of developing a strategy and not being able to implement it? So what this request does is it sets aside $838,000 to develop that strategy and to implement that strategy over the next 2 to 3 years. The understanding is that any of the $838,000 that is set aside or allocated to the broadband regional strategy that is not used will be redistributed to the 4 jurisdictions under the formula they have developed. We provided a sample of a regional broadband strategy RFP that was issued by another council of governments in the United States. Typically, what is happening is council of governments across the United States are the regional body that has been taking the lead on regional broadband strategies. What they say, I think, is very interesting. They said regional broadband strategies are not a field of dreams. It is in a situation where if you build it, they will come. But it is a situation of if you don't, they will leave. And I think that that is really an important statement to remember. This is important for our region. It sets us up for being a region where broadband is readily available to those who need it. It creates new opportunities for communities and economic development. And it ensures our long-term regional vitality and resiliency, which is really important. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, but I urge your support of this request.
Thank you, Paul and Brenda. Are there questions or comments from the MPC? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really excited for this particular opportunity that we have. We didn't know we were getting a source of funds, and we really have a huge opportunity here to develop a regional broadband strategy. I can't say how critical this is. I mean, Brenda said it all. I enthusiastically support this particular distribution. I know it's a compromise between the MPO and the MPC, but I think it's a really good one. And it's really gonna, put us in a competitive spot in order to reach that broadband money. I know that we were all pretty anxious to see the transportation infrastructure package pass. And this is a huge chunk of it for broadband. And we have a lot of rural areas that I really want to get connected. And without this particular position and this consultant, I'm finding it difficult to find ways in order to do that. So I urge the rest of the board to approve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Councilor Moe.
I guess you can hear me. No, I'm not muted. Okay, you can hear me. Our country was connected by the interstate highway system years ago. That's what tied us together. Those days are going away, are going to be gone because of greenhouse issues. Fiber is going to link our country back together again. And with this program, as we do this and expand it, Lane County is going to be part of all that. That's all.
Thank you, Councilor Moe. Mayor Van Gordon.
Yeah, and I think this is, I was excited to see this on the agenda, and I apologize for my tardiness here. The question I really had is, it seems like every organization in every, like our utility board's working on broadband, eWeb's worked on broadband before. Could you kind of maybe give us a little bit of a line of sight or what conversations have been to make this truly sort of a regional strategy? Because we really do need, we kind of need a plan that, gets us where we want to go.
Thank you, Gordon. That's an excellent question. And that's part of the problem is everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And what we haven't done is come up with a regional strategy where we are all collaborating together. And that includes with Benton and Lincoln County, which also, that is a council of government area as well. They have funding to create a broadband feasibility study. And so what this will do is it will coordinate and tie all of those efforts together so that we are leveraging all of our resources and all of our efforts as one regional strategy. And I think that that's really important, even down to the granular level, where what we don't want to have happen is a vendor show up to install part of a facility and find out that another vendor has showed up in the exact same place. And that's one of the risks that we have if we don't have a regional strategy where we're all working together. So that will be part of the charge for the consultant, is to work with all of the jurisdictions and the parties that are working on their own thing and tie those all together. And just so you know, I was very hopeful that you would approve this request. We have an RFP that is ready to be released next week, should you approve this. We need to get on this, we've already reached out to some consultants to let them know that this might be coming. We want to get on this as soon as possible, but the charge will be to bring everyone together as one coordinated effort, even though everyone has their own priorities and their own strategies.
Yeah,
I hope that.
I'm supportive in any help that we all can be to, continue to bring the sort of parties to the table. I think it's important because I know that for Springfield, getting a broader strategy about how to tackle this, because the utility board is the first, the person on first with it, would be helpful.
Thank you, Mayor Van Gordon. Mayor Venice.
Yes, thank you for this. I'm very supportive of this request, and I look forward to this body moving forward on it. I completely appreciate the fact that you actually have to plan what you're going to do, and that planning has to start right away. So I totally appreciate the urgency of these federal dollars. They're available now. There's a sort of a critical moment where you have to be ready for them, and we're not quite ready. So I totally understand the urgency of it. And the other thing that I want to say is, because we're a regional body and we talk about this a lot, about the regional planning, that it is my hope that you'll come back to us with sort of updates and lessons learned as you go through this planning process, because our jurisdictions we're all doing this work. And so I think it would be helpful for us to hear from you, what you're learning from this and how that implementation looks like it's going to play out, so that we're all really communicating with each other about where are the gaps, what are the pitfalls, what are the assets that we have that maybe we don't recognize now in terms of doing this work. So I look forward to hearing more over time about how this rolls out.
Thank you, Mayor Venice. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I just want to add my voice in support of this. I think it's important. I appreciate everything that's been said, and I don't want to retell the same ground. But anytime we can use funding to leverage more funding, that's incredibly important. And then the last thing I just want to say is, whenever we can work together as a region, it makes us stronger. Not only does it make us more interoperable with each other, but it really truly strengthens what we are all trying to accomplish in our individual communities. I mean, the economy certainly does not stop at human-made boundaries. Wildfires do not stop there, and our communication system does not stop there. So I appreciate this, and I hope this passes. And with that said, is there a motion? Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of the allocation of SRSA funding as presented.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Councilor Moe seconds. Anyone opposed, please signify by raising your hand or virtual hand. Seeing none, I'm taking that's unanimous approval, and very appreciative for everyone's support.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to 6D, Safe Routes to Schools, SRTS 2021 through 2025 Strategic Plan. Looks like our presenter is Sarah, is it Mays or Mazi? I hope I'd like to pronounce that correctly.
Chair, I just made Sarah a co-host, so hopefully she's able to turn on her video sound, and I think she's going to be sharing her screen in a minute. Sarah, are you prepared?
I am, but I just got off a training and I'm on my phone. I haven't left where I am yet though, so let me just open my computer. I could use a couple of minutes.
In the interest of time, should we go on to the next item and come back, or?
Chair, it's a little humorous, but I was actually having competing requests between these two agenda items to go last, because one of the presenters for the moving ahead item is not present yet and was getting off an airplane right about now. Sarah, go ahead, Sarah.
It will just take me a moment. Were you going to say that you could share my slides?
I have slides and the video ready to go. If you want to direct me, I'll share them.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, let me share if that's okay. Give me a second here.
Please.
Take off my bike helmet and my raincoat.
Oh, is it raining?
Oh, just a bit.
This is supposed to be baseball season.
Okay, folks, can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Sarah, I have your title slide up.
Okay, thank you. I am going to pop open my computer and switch over if I can, but can you all see me and hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So thank you for making the time on your agenda to talk about safe routes to school. We just completed our strategic plan, and so wanted to share that with you and just take a look at recent accomplishments and also introduce some new staff. So I'll let, and I'll share that I'm the 4J Safe Routes to School coordinator. There should be a couple of other Safe Routes staff on the call. If they could go ahead and introduce themselves, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi. My name is Kevin. I am the Safe Routes to School regional coordinator for the 3 school districts in Eugene and Springfield. And I work for the Eugene School District.
And I'm Rachel. I'm the Bethel's Safe Routes to School coordinator.
Sarah, you're muted.
Thank you. Moving on, 4J put together a great little video of safe routes to school, and it's 4J focused, but we're really doing similar work across the region. So I thought it was a good way to share some of our work. So we could go on to the next slide and play that video. And I'll actually jump off my phone during that time and jump back on my computer. There's always this challenge. Maybe not.
Hey, Paul, we're not hearing the sound on the video.
I'm sad to say neither am I, even though.
Oh, okay.
I think you especially have to share it.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to change that. I don't see an option for sharing the audio.
I know I've done it before, but I can't remember at the moment. Well, we can move on, and maybe someone, maybe Rachel or Kevin, maybe you can Google it and we can come back to it. So we could go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so I think that most of you are familiar with Safe Routes to School, the program structure, but just in case, you can go ahead and click. We have coordinators housed in each of the 3 main school districts in the area, Bethel and 4J and Eugene and Springfield. Kevin's role is a regional support role. So he works with all 3 school districts, and that's actually replacing 3 part-time jobs that we had before. We had 2 part-time assistant positions and a part-time coordinator. So now we have a full-time person supporting all 3 districts. And you can click again, please, Paul. The funding for the program comes from MPO, it comes from discretionary funds that you all decide upon. Thank you so much. And we also partner with each of the entities within the MPO to deliver our programs in different ways. You can click again, please. And LCOG administers our grant and provides other support. And then the Oregon Department of Transportation has Safe Routes to School funds for infrastructure, which I'm sure all of you know. And they also do have some other program support in the means of some incentives and graphics and communications that all the programs in the state can use. All right, next. So we, as I mentioned, we just finished our strategic plan. This was worked on with mainly our past coordinators, and our new coordinators have come into the plan and worked on it as well. Next. We have 6 E's of safe routes to school, but there's been in the during this last year and a half, this time of so much transition culturally, we have shifted away from the enforcement E and added an engagement E, as it came into more into public consciousness that enforcement, particularly in the form of police presence, can make many members of our community actually feel less safe on the streets. Next. Engagement is an E that we are still working to figure out what our actual actions will be, but our overall intention and goal is to create new opportunities for community members and organizations, for school staff, for students and their families to share their ideas, questions, and concerns about safe routes to school programming and infrastructure. So more of a chance for people to weigh in and participate and be involved in what the programming looks like that is being offered to support them. Next. In terms of equity, I would say that similarly, we have, equity has been an overarching theme for Safe Routes to School that's been integrated into the other E's, at least since I've been in this position for the last 5 years. But I would say that in the last year and a half, we have also shifted towards a greater focus on equity, and we've been trying to work out what that means for our program to really center equity in all Safe Routes to School activities, with particular attention to ensuring that outcomes are fair and increase safety and health for demographic groups with disparate outcomes in areas of active and shared transportation. And equity in the transportation and Safe Routes to School context is really crucial because it pertains not only to students' mobility, their sense of safety in public spaces, and their physical health, but it also pertains to their ability to access education. So very important for Safe Routes to School. Next. I'm going to highlight just a couple of action items from our different, the strategic plan is broken up into E's, the different E's. I'm not going to share every action item, but I'll share a couple highlights. So we have been working to distribute our resources, both of time and financial resources and other resources, with the preponderance going to those students, communities, and schools that need it most. But we would like to develop a strategy for using an equity lens so that we can make sure that we're doing that as objectively as possible. And then we also would like to develop an equity tool. We're in the process of developing that to measure how effectively we are actually delivering the resources where they are needed most and in an effective manner. Next. So I've talked a bit about the impacts of the last year and a half on our program. COVID, of course, has also played a huge role in our program. And so the slide here is a picture of our website, because instead of working with kids directly, we were working virtually. And we created some remote learning resources in English and Spanish that we shared on our website and through classes as much as we could. The program was very strong when COVID hit. We had a staff of 6. We had intern and volunteer support. We were partnering with a very strong City of Eugene recreation program. Willamette was starting to take on programmatic elements in the education realm for us. And then when COVID hit, with point-to-point closing, we shrank down to just 3 staff people with no ability to work with students in person. And we are still coming back from that, both in terms of our own staffing, our partners' staffing, especially at the City of Eugene Recreation Program and Willamette, and with our ability to attract and retain staff. You didn't meet a Springfield coordinator because our Springfield coordinator just left, in part because she was unable to find housing in the area. And we're also impacted still by our ability to work within the schools and to work with volunteers. Then, of course, there are the other impacts of COVID that relate to safe routes to school in terms of people's willingness to ride the school bus and ride transit, the shift that people made related to that. You know, school buses, parents were actually told, or families were told, we can't social distance on the school buses. And they were kind of encouraging families not to use the school buses. So a lot of people started driving. Some people did start biking and walking. So we, as it relates to our program, a lot of the strides that we had made and a lot of the ways in which we had actually accomplished the goals of our last strategic plan, we've kind of fallen back from, and now are working to catch back up. Next, please. Thank you, Paul. So some accomplishments that, again, we reached and now we're rebuilding towards. We've started the kindergarten and first grade Learn to Ride program that I told you about several meetings ago. And actually we have now piloted that in each school district, which is great. Pedestrian safety moved from just a contract with the City of Eugene being offered in some second grade classes to being offered in ideally, hopefully, all PE classes in 4J. And we're looking to how we can do that in other districts because it expanded in 4J, the number of students we're reaching at least tenfold. Before COVID, we had scheduled bike safety education classes, our 2-week class, in every eligible school. And that was huge for us. That is knocked way down now, and we're trying to reach back up to that. The Willamette partnership, we're also still trying to build. We had been providing scooter kits on loan in some districts where, and have PE teachers still using those to provide kind of a bridge between pedestrian safety for younger kids and bike safety for middle school or 5th grade students in Bethel. And then we did kind of a mini pilot of transit safety. So we, next slide, please. We're working towards getting back to all of that. And so expanding bike and pedestrian safety, we do want to do a more robust pilot of a transit education program and hopefully land on something effective that we can roll out to all 3 districts, particularly now that we have these amazing youth transit passes, free student passes for all students. And we've been doing this, and we want to continue to expand our work with underserved and historically marginalized communities, just targeting education activities to those students who need it most. Next, please. With encouragement, I've got this asterisk as well. That's the COVID asterisk that we had accomplished this, and we're working back towards it. We had bike rodeos in, I think, every elementary school in Springfield and many of them in Bethel and 4J. We were working in 4J with the after-school programs, including the BEST program, which targets the highest need students in the highest need schools. And we had expanded walk and roll events with just about all of our schools participating. We were getting close to that, all of our schools participating in either, at least one a year, with bike blender smoothie events in the mornings at some of the middle schools. In Springfield, they were adding bike rodeos into theirs. And we had, in 4J, we had school buses dropping students off so that the kids on the bus could participate in a big group walk, bike trains. And we did actually just hold a walk and roll event yesterday, and some schools are doing it throughout the month. And that was our kind of first real one back since pre-COVID times. And there was pretty good involvement. And I've heard some feedback from some of the people who were leading them at different schools that they had a lot of participation. So that's encouraging. We had partnered with the City of Eugene's adaptive recreation program at the Hilliard Center to offer some adaptive bike open houses so that families of students with who are alter-abled would know about that resource and could use it. And we've been sending out messaging in English and Spanish monthly around walk and roll events for schools to use, just to foster that culture of we want to find another way to get to school other than driving alone. And then we have had and continue to have walking school buses at a couple of schools in the region. It's something that we want to continue working on. It's a proven way to get more kids walking to school. It's a big lift, but we're working on that. Next, please. So action items for the next upcoming years, are we would like to have an event, at least one event at every school per year, more walking school buses and bike trains, more engagement with middle and high school students, which we're getting some of. I've been engaging with the climate justice group in 4J, which is high school students who then go back and work with their environmental clubs. They've been excited about working on transportation. And then we've been helping with the rollout for the youth transit passes, which is an amazing program and a big lift to get those passes out to students. Next, please. In terms of engineering, there's a lot that's been going up around the region recently, and I'm sure you see it as you get around, however you get around. I just listed a few here, but the projects are coming from Grove and North Park sidewalks, for example. Those were part of 4J bond fund, and then the city and county work together also to make those happen. And then we've had funds from the state's Safe Routes to School grant infrastructure program that allowed for improved crossings and flashing school zone signs, and a grant from another discretionary funds grant provided funds to improve the worst of the bike parking at districts throughout the region. And then we also, I believe at all schools, have added skateboard and scooter racks. And then it's been really great to be using our ranking system that we developed to prioritize infrastructure needs based on equity and safety primarily, that we developed with the jurisdictions, and then we're using them with the jurisdictions to determine where funds should go and where efforts should go to improve infrastructure around schools and on school grounds. Next, please. So our goal is to continue to advocate for and support efforts to install both temporary and permanent improvements to infrastructure. And I see that Emma made a comment that I won't go to right now, so I couldn't stay focused here, but I didn't highlight any Springfield infrastructure in there, but there has been recent Springfield infrastructure as well that supports Safe Routes to School. And engineering, next, please. So our last E is evaluation, and we do rely on school staff to help us with evaluation, because one of the ways we get data is classroom tallies. So we ask teachers to ask their students how they got to school that day and how they're getting home. And then we have parent surveys. So that's a major source of our data collection, and that we are not asking for this year and have not asked for during COVID, of course, when students weren't going to school. No one was driving to school though. it's challenging, and it's challenging to get that data, and it's hardest for the schools that are the highest need schools where we want to be providing the most service. So that continues to be tricky, but we will keep plugging away at it. And we also aim to get more of our data up on our website where it's accessible to all. We are working on that equity scoring tool, as mentioned. And the purpose of all of this evaluation is so we can continue to improve the program and accomplish our goals. So next slide, and that's all, unless we can get that video to work, but if not, we can.
I'm willing to give it one shot. I've been getting some helpful text messages in the background here about what to do.
Okay.
Be a second, and I'm going to see if it works. No promises here.
There's also a link in the chat.
Let me make one adjustment. Okay, let's see what happens. And I'm still not
Throughout the
hearing it
4J
either.
school
I'm
district,
sorry.
students are safely making their way to school thanks to the
hearing it.
Safe Routes to School program.
The Safe Routes to School program's goal is to make it easier and safer and more fun for students to use active transportation like biking, walking, skating, or scooting to school, or shared transportation like riding the school bus or the city bus or carpooling.
The program has many spokes and starts with the tiny travelers.
We're practicing riding bikes. It's just really fun to learn how to ride a bike.
They love it. They really enjoy getting to ride and getting to learn. They just feel so accomplished once they know how to ride a bicycle.
Super fun. And because I like riding bikes.
We're just learning more and more about how good it is for us, both physically and mentally, to move our bodies.
Moving to middle school, these students steer their lessons off campus.
They're just starting to be old enough to go ride by themselves with their friends in neighborhoods, teaching them traffic rules and, more than anything, situational awareness and being able to stay safe no matter what the cars around them are doing.
All of this means that our students have more awareness and will be safer when they're walking, biking to school, and also empowered to do so, empowered to be more independent so we can have higher attendance and more freedom for kids.
We do drills in the neighborhood, and then on days 9 and 10, we get to go do a big route throughout the neighborhood. We get neighborhood streets, we get some of the busier streets with bike lanes, bike paths, just give them a huge variety so that they're well versed in everywhere in this neighborhood that they're going to go on their bikes.
These classes, along with the program's walk and roll to school days, move students to use active transportation for their trips to school. Students are also feeling empowered as they pave the way towards protecting our climate. South Eugene's Climate Club is creating a rolling caravan.
People could meet at Spencer Butte and then meet up with the group on the separated bike path.
Hopefully more people in the community are understanding how bikes operate on the streets, and it's making the entire community safer, not just these kids.
Safe Routes to School is also filling gaps, securing helmets and bikes for students, and identifying infrastructure problems and areas for improvements around town.
We have bike racks and skateboard and scooter racks at every school. I think it's crucial right now that our school districts and our other government agencies are prioritizing a program that helps us shift to a more sustainable means of transportation, also really a more livable community.
So on that, thank you for prioritizing safe routes to school. We really believe that it's making a difference. So we can answer any questions, comments.
Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. Any comments or questions from MPC? And I see Mayor Venice in the queue.
Sarah, I want to thank you for your work, and I want to thank you for this presentation. There's both the immediate in terms of the the empowerment of students learning how to ride a bike at school. What fun is that? How great is that? But there's sort of the way this moves us towards our sort of broader goals of just having a safer community, identifying where there are safety hazards that children are facing and then that adults are facing in those same locations, and then moving us really forward in our goal to be just, a community in which we get out of our cars and we find safer and lower fuel use ways of getting around town, and what children learn as 6-year-olds around how to navigate, they carry with them for the rest of their lives around how to navigate. I mean, this is how we change the culture about how we move through space. So I just really appreciate your work and really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other comments? I just want to say thank you, Sarah, as well. I especially appreciate how we are getting our young people more physically active. You build those habits, carry us into adulthood, and it reduces a lot of health issues, morbidity and mortality. And the more we can do to have a healthy community, I think the better off everybody is. So thank you. And Don, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just want to give applaud to Sarah and the whole program, having the children educated and just acclimated to active transportation, combining that with our public transportation network is just so important to reducing the number of automobile trips in the community. I think this is a very important project, and really commend your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Sarah. This was an information-only item. There is no action requested of the MPC. So with that, we will move on to our next agenda item, 6E, moving ahead, locally preferred alternative. Rob Innerfield and Andrew Martin.
Hi there. Great. I'm going to share my screen momentarily. Let's see. Great. Okay, so moving ahead is a project that's a collaboration between the City of Eugene and Lane Transit District that's been studying what kinds of investments we want to make on 5 of our most important corridors over the next 10 years. We started this planning project back in 2015 with 11 corridors, and through evaluation and public feedback, we narrowed the study to 5 corridors. And these are Highway 99, River Road, Pearl Oak, Amazon Parkway to LCC via 30th, Coburg Road, and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. We developed high-level street design concepts that would provide increased safety and accessibility for people walking, biking, and riding the bus. These designs were created to help us meet many of the community's goals and plans, including our Vision Zero, climate action, and transportation system plans, among others. The Eugene City Council and LTD's Board of Directors both adopted, I'm skipping ahead here. So I'm gonna hand it over to Andrew now, and then he's gonna tell you more about the process.
Could you go a couple slides up too? One more.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks. So Rob mentioned we've been studying high-level street design concepts, and most of those had 3 transit options on them, with also some safety and access improvements that were really implemented in distinct ways on each corridor. So we've got the three options there: no build, which means no investment as part of moving ahead or not now, and it also means that if future conditions change, that there's an interest in the community, we could consider other multimodal investments. The enhanced corridor alternative, it's new to our community when we do these kinds of projects, and it was really designed as a moderate level of investment. MX is something we are familiar with here in Eugene and Springfield, and that's really our highest level of investment. But the enhanced corridor and MX really work from the same toolbox. It's just about the sense of scale. And these concepts on each corridor were designed from the beginning with input from the public and with the goal of minimizing any of the potentially negative consequences that we know happen whenever we make changes to the existing roadway. Next slide, please, Rob. So moving ahead is a process 6 years in the making. In 2015, we began with community corridor design workshops. That's what we call them. And I love these photos. These are from those. And we really had the community help us figure out what street designs best met their vision for the community. We used those kind of high-level concepts to conduct analysis on 17 different environmental topics to determine what would happen if we implemented each of these alternatives on each of the corridors. We published this in 2018 as our alternatives analysis. Then we conducted several rounds of public engagement along each corridor and with the broader community as we refined and narrowed options, which eventually led to what was presented at a public hearing in October 2019. And at each decision point in the process of the last 6 years, we've gotten feedback from the public. We've worked with project committees like LTD Strategic Planning Committee and the Moving Ahead Oversight Committee, as well as seeking direction from Eugene City Council and LTD's board. Now that all of kind of those steps are complete, I'll say also we, as Rob mentioned, we went to LTD's board and to the Eugene City Council in March, and we asked them to adopt a locally preferred alternative, which we'll share with you in just a moment. But now that all of those steps are complete, we're here to ask for MPC's adoption or concurrence with the locally preferred alternative along each corridor. And this will allow staff to continue this process and take these high-level concepts and turn them into more detailed designs, seek funding, and complete environmental review. So I just wanted to kind of explain what a locally preferred alternative is, because that's what we're asking you to adopt. So a locally preferred alternative is a key part of the federal environmental review and permitting process, and it really sets the high-level vision for the corridor, but it's not the final design. If we select MX on a corridor as the locally preferred alternative, it does not lock us into a specific MX design, but it does mean that staff will be working to figure out what MX can look like on that corridor. For instance, we've been analyzing where we think stations might go and where those stations might require changes to something like a driveway. Our next step in the process, once we select a locally preferred alternative, is to take the conceptual design and make it detailed, where we can shift the station around, try to minimize the impacts, and really have those detailed answers we need before we can actually build something. An LPA does not lock us in to building something. It allows us to take the next steps in the process, which, as I mentioned, are to work on the detailed designs, to go through the environmental review process, and seek funding for the project. And we'll continue to check in with our decision makers in the community as we go through this process.
Thanks, Andrew. So what you're seeing now on the screen is the locally preferred alternative that was adopted by the City Council and the LTD board. And the next step is that because this is a regionally significant project, there's a need for the MPC policy, the MPO policy board, that being the MPC, to adopt the locally preferred alternative as well. So now I'm just going to walk you through what's on the screen here. So what was adopted as the locally preferred alternative is what's called enhanced corridor, which Andrew described earlier, on Highway 99, MX on River Road, no build on the route on 30th, an enhanced corridor on Coburg Road, but with additional design study, especially on the southern end of the corridor between Oakway Road and the Ferry Street Bridge, and enhanced corridor on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. We have some slides that we can show you later if any MPC members are interested, that sort of goes through some of the pros and cons or the reasoning for each of these corridors as to why they were a good fit for the mode that's recommended here. And this is just a flow chart showing the next steps. So as Andrew said, we will be working on design refinement, especially with business property owners and residents who live and own property along the corridors. We'll be seeking funding to implement these. And we're just talking with LTD this morning about developing a funding strategy, and that different corridors might be a fit for different sorts of federal and state grant programs. Then there's a need to complete the environmental review and ultimately permit and construct the project. So that's all we have. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see if there are any questions from MPC members.
Questions from MPC members? I'm not seeing any. So with that said, do we have a motion to adopt the preferred alternative? And now, do we need to do this by each corridor or one adoption for the entire package?
Just for the entire package.
Do we have a motion to adopt the entire proposed package?
I so move.
I'm sorry, who was that?
I had a comment just before we make the motion.
Oh.
Where's Springfield at in all this? I know there's a reason, but what?
You didn't get in.
So I can answer that, Counselor. So Springfield, when we started this project, we had initially considered, in particular, the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard corridor. In this proposal, it stops at I-5 because Springfield didn't have the staff capacity to work on Main Street and on other corridors at that time. Okay. And so the choice was to focus Springfield's attention on Main Street, which we're still working on the Main McVeigh transit study that's kind of been on hold while we address the safety study. So as we're looking at this, we're certainly, I think, at LTD, and I assume the City of Eugene, willing to include Springfield when we're looking at where these corridors continue in the future, if there's an interest by the community in Springfield to do that. Particularly on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, where the investments would abruptly stop at I-5, and so we can always revisit that and take a look at what happens after I-5 as part of this project's next steps or a separate project.
I know the Main Street project is, I don't know where it's going to go, but that's going to be a route we're going to have to discuss too in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moe. Mayor Van Gordon.
All right, thank you. And just before we vote, I think one of the observations that I would make is that, from a regional level, right, like when I looked at this, I really looked at it, if, LTD and Eugene, it's their areas, it's what their design and what their vision for their community is. I'm definitely happy to support it, but I think as we've had conversations about regional planning and how we find balance between those two, I think that's a valuable thing to point out, is that really, that we really need to be following the lead of the City of Eugene when it plans for its transportation corridors.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other comments or questions from the MPC? Okay, now I guess we're ready for a motion to adopt the preferred alternative.
I move we adopt the preferred alternative.
Motion's been made by Mayor Venice. Second by Councilor Moe. Anyone opposed? No. I see no opposition. Therefore, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to our last item, which we've actually done better than I had anticipated. We're on to 6F, and that's follow-up and next steps. The first item up is an ODOT update. Is there a report from ODOT?
Chair, I'm going to real quickly jump in here because I probably should have done so during the introductions at the start of the meeting, but we have with us today Jim Gamble, who is our interim Area 5 manager after Franny's retirement. So, Jim, I believe you're presenting this today.
I am unaware I was doing a presentation. I apologize for that.
Well, welcome on board anyway, Jim. Do you have any updates you would like to share?
Well, I'm just excited to learn this new position. I am the permanent District 5 manager for maintenance and operations. And I volunteered to assist because there's a lot of projects and a lot of initiatives going through to ensure that they were successful through the summer. So it's just a lateral for me. I'm enjoying learning a whole new process. And if you have any questions on Oregon 22 Track and Field World Championships, I would be the point of contact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Jim? Mayor Venice.
Well, yeah, with a lead like that, if there's something you want to tell us about plans for Oregon 22 briefly, I don't need a whole report, but I'd love to hear something.
We're going to see and do things that we have not done before as an agency. It's going to be very high profile. It will be, I'm told, it's a large investment from the governor's office. I think approximately, what I was told, $40 million. And Matt Garrett, our old director, is the governor's liaison for Oregon 22 to ensure its success. Matt's in the Eugene area, I think once or twice a week. We're working, ODOT is working very closely with the Oregon 22 committee to get them through any processing or permits, race course for the marathon, Pioneer Parkway being used for part of that course to Autzen Stadium. With that, I'm be meeting with the city of Eugene because there's a lot of banner requests, and Ferry Street Bridge was brought up to do. A lot of it would mirror what was in Australia Track and Field World Championships as far as banner and perfect shots for television. I hope that was a good 30,000 foot review for you.
Yeah, that was a good little perspective. Thank you so much, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, let's move on to 6F, the second item. And this is the MTIP administrative amendments. This is information only. There was an attachment in our packet. Are there any questions from the MPC on the amendments?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any. Moving on to the last item of 6F. Next steps and agenda build. Are there anyone from the MPC questions on upcoming agenda items, which I don't know that we have? Paul, do you have anything you want to say on that?
Chair, I will say that we have done a good job today in taking care of all the time-sensitive items. I am not anticipating a large meeting next month, and I also am going to want to be checking in on availability for July and August, because I know that sometimes jurisdictions, recesses, and other things can play havoc with our quorums.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Paul or the LCOG staff? Seeing none. Oh, Mayor Venice.
Sorry, I realize I'm like popcorn today. I keep popping in, but just following up on the beginning of this meeting around public hearings, and having now come through the meeting and realizing that, a number of these moving ahead, we've had a ton of public engagement on moving ahead, but it hasn't exactly come to this body, and recognizing that it's a little tricky to figure out where we need to identify something for sort of a focused public comment period. But I guess I just want to plant the seed that maybe there's another way of doing this, of foreshadowing something that is coming and opening that up for public comment, or, I'm not sure what that looks like, but just sort of hearing that even though some of these projects have had really a very robust public engagement before they get here, at the same time, this body is moving something forward and, is there another way we can do it? I don't know what the answer is, but I'd like to be sort of responsive to the concern.
Thank you, Mayor.
Chair,
Yes.
if I may, Mayor. One of the things I guess I'd like to mention in response to your comments and the comments earlier from the public is that if you recall 2 months ago, we presented you with I believe it was 2 months ago, with the 4-year look at all the activities that are going on. One of those, I don't recall exactly where it was slotted time-wise, but one of those is an update of your public participation plan. I referred to it earlier. It was last adopted in 2015. It is due for an update. I believe it's actually earlier in that 4-year period than later. So we will be getting into that and talking to you in depth about the public participation at this body.
Thank you, Paul.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Anything else to come before the MPC? Councilor Mo.
We got through this meeting very smoothly, and that's because of your great leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mo. I'm amazed we got through such a big, robust agenda, but I think this was an important set of topics that we were discussing. So thank you all for your professionalism and your cooperation. And with that, looks like we're adjourned. My clock says 12:57 p.m.
Thank you.